It's got more horsepower than a Scuderia, more than the S65, not quite what the LP640 has, but goodness gracious, it is a fast thing. If you're out driving a Ferrari, a Lamborghini, or some exotic car, a popular question that you get is, well, if this is your car, what does your wife drive? And I usually respond, she really doesn't care that much about cars. She indulges me in this crazy hobby, but in fact, she drives a Range Rover, a car that we really like. And that sounds really good. Oh, Range Rovers are nice. People know that, I guess. But of course, just because the car isn't for me, it's something for my wife, doesn't mean that I can separate myself from my normal strategies and tactics of car buying. I still have to find the worst example of the coolest car, even if it's for her. So my wife having a Range Rover and it becoming the one that I ended up buying is generally like, hey baby, we're going to Hawaii, but we're gonna stay at the Super 8 motel, or sweetheart, you need to pamper yourself, so I got you a gift certificate to one of those guys that camps out in the middle of the mall with a chair for a 10-minute massage. It sounds really great, and it does sometimes look really great, but it's not quite all it could be. And so the most recent car that we've had for the last 3 years was a 2010 Range Rover Autobiography. And I talked a little bit about the ridiculousness of the nature in which I purchased it in a way that I could not get the dealer to stop lying about, and it became a massive thing, and I made a video about it. But we got that fixed, and the car generally was pretty good. But over the last little while, honestly, it's been getting a little bit more Range Rover-ish than I would like, and I started to think, it is time for us to find whatever is next. Also, we are going to have another child next year, and so the idea of a third row with 2 car seats does start to make a lot of sense. And so we had looked at a few different things, and she'd always loved the Mercedes GL. And a few weeks ago, I got a random email from a VINwiki fan from Houston, Texas, and he said, hey, Ed, I love your mastery of the English language or something like that. Would you mind helping me write a description because I want to sell my wife's GL63? And to me, the GL63 is just one of those holy grail SUVs. I have not ever been able to convince my wife that an R63 is the right car for our family, and so the GL63 is the next best weird high horsepower Mercedes. And so I generally do like buying the AMG or M version of any German car because as they depreciate, the gravity towards the highest normal trim car in value is pretty significant. And so like if you look at the market today, a nicely equipped GL 550 versus a GL 63, there's not that much separation there. And so as I looked at the market, I was like, the GL 63 is a really, really cool kind of goal car. And back in 2016, when I bought the 2010 Range Rover, it was actually a really hard time to buy a luxury SUV because in most cases, I try to buy cars that are about 20 grand for daily drivers. It's an artifact of something that I decided long ago that I wouldn't finance daily use cars, but I was okay financing exotic or interesting or investment cars that I could kind of professionally trade in and hopefully make money on. I could manage the risk there, but I hate depreciation. So the worst possible time to buy any aging British or German car is kind of within 6 months plus or minus of the warranty expiration date, because that's when the market is really adjusting hard to whatever long-term opportunity exists with these cars. And so in 2016, when I bought the 2010 Range Rover, we were less than 3 years away from redesigns on the Cayenne, the Range Rover, and the Mercedes GL. And so they were still way too much money. And I knew that essentially I could own this $20,000 Range Rover that I bought for less than the depreciation I'd be avoiding from the other cars in terms of just buying them right then. And so we were now at a point earlier this year where it started to make sense to start shopping. And we'd been looking around kind of casually, but the thing about any car that my wife owns is that it will be an exceptionally well-maintained example in terrible cosmetic shape. She tends to be very, very hard on cars. Miraculously, she's never been in a significant accident, but she has bumped into things very, very often. Not long after we got married, I just had to get rid of this Mustang convertible that she had, which was an awful car, despite what Ford will try to tell you when you apply for a Ford GT. And so I had to get rid of that, and I ended up buying a 2004 Porsche Cayenne S from one of my customers at the dealership. And it had been in an accident, but was a pretty nice car, and it was perfect for her. And I'll never forget, I got a phone call from her not long after we bought it, and she's like crying, just absolutely freaking out. And I was like, what happened? And she said that she had backed into into a car that was kind of parked in the middle of an aisle that she claimed she couldn't see. And she said, well, and then I kind of backed up and the car just stopped moving. And I thought that I must have, gotten stuck in a hole or something like that. And so the logical thing I thought was just to press the accelerator harder. And she had just ground the back of the car all along the side of this Honda, and neither of them knew what to do. I guess the woman driving the car barely spoke English, and so I got on the phone with her. I explained, look, we'll make your car right, just exchange information, and they went on their way because both cars were obviously drivable. And so I got in touch with that woman eventually, but she got an estimate, but then couldn't relay it to me, and then just dropped it. I tried everything to get in touch with the body shop and with her, and I don't know if for some reason she thought she was going to be held at fault or anything like that, but powering through an accident is a very, consistent trait of my wife. She knows very little about cars, but she does, like I said, indulge me in the hobby. And so the Range Rover at this point has gotten, dings, dents, scratches kind of all over the place and definitely needs some reconditioning, but mechanically it's really solid because I've learned that for all the independence that I know, having a loaner car and a very known idea of how a car is going to get fixed is really worth the slight premium that you have to pay in the Atlanta market relative to the Land Rover independents that exist. And so it's always been to the dealer, always been fixed there. And honestly, you don't save that much money on Land Rover independents. I mean, none of them are reliable. But again, like I've said before, it's one of those cars that we just love as car enthusiasts, kind of in spite of itself. We know they're terrible. We know they're unreliable and expensive to maintain. But, again, that's kind of consistent with my MO for car buying. I want to avoid depreciation and play Russian roulette with the maintenance. I want to make sure that I'm not just going to lose money while the car is sitting there, but I may have to spend money if I want to put miles on it. And overall, that's worked out pretty well, although I will say that it looks like the 2010 Range Rover is probably going to be the most expensive car that I have ever owned. I'll lose probably $15,000 to $18,000 between some depreciation and some maintenance costs, which again is less than I would have lost owning any of the other options that I was looking at in that window of time, but that's more than I've ever lost on a car. And so, oh well, it was a great car, we enjoyed it, but this guy emails me with this GL63 for sale, and I'm excited. He's kind of telling me, I'm like, well, you know what, I may not want to help you sell it, I might just want to buy it. And so he said what he wanted, and I asked if he'd gotten any dealer offers. He had, and so after some back and forth, we agreed to meet $1,000 above what the dealers had offered for the car. And fortunately, it had the manufacturer's extended warranty, and so it had about a year until November of next year of Mercedes factory warranty. I can't think of a time I've ever owned a car that had a warranty other than a couple of the exotics for the rental car company. So it's certainly an interesting novelty, and I'm going to get to have cars repaired on someone else's dime for the next year. So I'm excited about that. So we came to terms. I flew out there. Nick of Ant Out of Face Motorcycle Incident and Cross Country Vanquish Trip happened to be in the area, so he drove back with me, and I really, really love the car. I mean, I do love Range Rovers. I always have, but they really have never gotten their act together to be reliable cars, and now that I've got my wife and kids to be transported around in them, it does make sense to have something that's a little bit more dependable. No idea if the GL will be. None of my old AMG cars have been reliable as they age or inexpensive to maintain, but I do continue to love them. So I'm loving more of an AMG garage now. It's a beautiful car. It's very comfortable and it drives quite well. After I got home, the guy asked me, "Did you notice the Renntech stuff?" And I was like, no, you didn't tell me it had any Renntech stuff. He's like, yeah, no, I wanted it to kind of be a surprise for you. I thought you'd like it. And I was like, well, sure. What is it, guys? It's got the ECU and the filters and the spark plugs and everything else. And I think it's got about 610 horsepower. So it's got more horsepower than the Scuderia, more than the S65. Not quite what the LP640 has, but goodness gracious, it is a fast thing. And again, at $40,000, what I paid for it, I could have saved maybe 10% to buy a 550. But a year, 2, 3, 4 years from now, the separation will actually widen again. This was a $132,000 car new with every single option you could put on one, and eventually I think it'll command a nice premium over what we would have lost owning anything else. But regardless, it's the new family hauler for the Bolian family. I'm excited to have it in the garage, and the Range Rover is headed on to a new home very, very soon.
Going somewhere in a hurry, ma'am? Let me explain your options.
Never mind, I got this.
TheTicketClinic.com